So, you think you're having a bad century? Try living in late medieval Europe. The 1300s kicked off with something called the Great Famine, which was just as fun as it sounds. Then the Black Death showed up, wiping out a casual third of the population. Just when things started to look slightly less apocalyptic, the climate decided to take a nosedive. Welcome to the Little Ice Age, where crops failed constantly and everyone was cold, hungry, and miserable. On top of that, the Catholic Church, the one institution that was supposed to offer some stability, was busy having its own internal meltdowns. You had popes and anti-popes, the Protestant Reformation was just around the corner, and religious certainty was crumbling. When society is this stressed, it doesn't look for complex geopolitical and meteorological explanations. It looks for a scapegoat, someone to blame for the sour milk, the sick child, the bad harvest. It needed a villain, and it was about to create one with spectacular enthusiasm. Every successful witch panic needs a good instruction manual. In 1487, it got one, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. This book was, to put it mildly, unhinged. It was written by a German inquisitor named Heinrich Kramer, a man who was essentially thrown out of town for being too creepy and obsessive even for his time. Undeterred, he wrote this masterpiece of misogyny and paranoia. He even slapped a fake papal endorsement on the front to give it some gravitas. The book laid out a terrifyingly simple argument. Witches are real, they get their power from the devil, and they are everywhere. It was a bestseller, second only to the Bible for a time. It detailed exactly how to identify, prosecute, and execute a witch. A key theme was that women were more susceptible to demonic temptation due to being, and this is a direct quote, feebler in both mind and body. So, a bad harvest wasn't due to poor soil, it was your elderly neighbor who looked at you funny. The book gave people permission to turn their deepest fears into a state-sanctioned murder weapon. So, how did you spot one of these supposed agents of Satan? Well, the criteria were wonderfully flexible. Did you have a mole, a birthmark, or a scar? That could be a devil's mark, a spot where Satan had branded his new recruit. Professional witch finders would go around with long needles, poking suspects to find a spot that was insensitive to pain. Of course, a retractable needle tip helped improve the discovery rate. Were you an old woman living alone, perhaps with a pet cat? You're basically asking for it. Did you have some knowledge of herbal medicine? You're a midwife who could heal a fever? Clearly, that knowledge didn't come from studying plants, it came from a demonic pact. The most dangerous thing you could be was unpopular. An accusation was a fantastic way to settle old scores or get your hands on a neighbor's property. Once the accusation was made, the burden of proof was on the accused to prove they weren't a witch, which is like trying to prove you're not a unicorn. The system was designed not to find truth, but to confirm a pre-existing belief. The real engine of the witch hunts wasn't mob justice. It was the legal system itself. European courts were undergoing a major shift from an accusatory system where the accuser had to provide proof to an inquisitorial one. Now, the court itself investigated the crime. This sounds more modern, but it came with a terrifying new feature. Judicial torture was now a perfectly legal way to get a confession. The logic was impeccable in a horrifying way. A witch's pact with the devil supposedly gave them the power to withstand pain. So, if a suspect refused to confess under, say, the thumbscrews, it wasn't proof of their innocence, it was proof of their guilt. The solution was simply to apply more torture. Devices like the strapado, which dislocated the suspect's shoulders, or the leg-crushing Spanish boot became standard tools of the judiciary. The goal wasn't to discover if a crime had been committed. It was to produce a confession that fit the pre-written script of what a witch was supposed to do. Justice became a manufacturing process. It turns out that when you systematically destroy a human body, people will say whatever you want them to say. Shocking, I know. The confessions extracted under torture were fantastically detailed and strangely uniform across Europe. Suspects would confess to flying on broomsticks or goats to a wild nocturnal gathering called a witch's sabbat. There, they would renounce Christ, kiss the devil's posterior as a sign of fealty, and engage in orgies. They'd confess to sacrificing babies and using their fat to create flying ointments. The details were often supplied by the interrogators themselves, who would ask leading questions like, "Did you not also curse your neighbor's cow?" until the broken suspect just agreed. The most sinister part? The confession wasn't the end. The final act of torture was often used to get the names of other witches who attended the sabbat. One accusation could spiral, creating a chain reaction that could consume an entire village. It was a pyramid scheme of death. While the witch craze hit most of Europe, one region went for the gold medal in persecution, the Holy Roman Empire. Modern-day Germany became the absolute epicenter, accounting for up to half of all executions in Europe. The question is, why? The answer lies in political fragmentation. The empire was a chaotic patchwork of over 1,000 semi-independent territories, each with its own ruler and its own court. There was no strong central authority to step in and say, "All right, everyone, calm down." This created a perverse kind of competition. A local prince-bishop could prove his piety and authority by staging a massive witch hunt. In places like Trier, Würzburg, and Bamberg, the trials reached an industrial scale. We're not talking about a few dozen people. We're talking about hundreds, sometimes over 1,000, executed in a single area over a few years. They executed the postmaster of Bamberg, the mayor, wealthy merchants, and even children. The accusations went right to the top of society. It wasn't a contained fire. It was a wildfire in a political forest with no fire breaks. Now, the typical image of a witch is a woman, and for good reason. About 75 to 80% of those accused were female. But it's important to remember that men and children were absolutely on the menu as well. The logic of witchcraft could be adapted to fit anyone. In some regions, like Iceland or Russia, the majority of those accused were actually men. The accusations against men often took a different flavor. Instead of cursing cattle, they were more likely to be accused of things like weather magic, causing hailstorms that destroyed crops. Or, in some of the more spectacular cases, they were accused of being werewolves. The case of Peter Stump in 1589 Germany is a prime example. Under torture, he confessed to having a magical belt from the devil that let him turn into a wolf. He admitted to a reign of terror and cannibalism. His execution was brutally theatrical. This reminds us that the panic wasn't just about misogyny. It was about a complete societal breakdown in the ability to distinguish reality from paranoid fantasy. So, why did it all stop? There was no single aha moment. It was more like a slow, exhausted fizzle. One of the bravest voices was a Jesuit priest named Friedrich Spee. He had served as a confessor to condemned witches in Germany and was horrified by what he saw. He wrote a book anonymously in 1631, arguing that the entire legal process was a sham. His killer argument was simple. Every single person he led to the stake, without exception, was innocent, and there was no way to survive the trials except through a miracle. His logic was that if the process was this flawed, it had to stop. At the same time, governments were becoming more centralized. A king in Paris had less patience for a local lord's witch-burning frenzy destabilizing a province. As legal systems became more standardized and required stronger evidence like more than a confession from a tortured 70-year-old, the conviction rates plummeted. People didn't necessarily stop believing in witches overnight, they just stopped being able to legally burn them. It's easy to look back and blame the whole affair on ignorant, superstitious peasants, but that's letting the real architects off the hook. The witch hunts were driven from the top down. They were theorized by educated theologians, codified by learned lawyers, and authorized by ruling elites. The average person might have made the initial accusation, but it was the machinery of the state and church that turned a village squabble into a death sentence. And let's not forget the financial incentive. In many territories, the property of a convicted witch was confiscated. Part of it went to the state, and part of it went to pay for the trial itself, the torturer's salary, the wood for the pyre, the celebratory dinner for the judges. The system literally paid for itself by finding more victims. It was a perfect feedback loop of paranoia and profit. The witch craze wasn't just a product of fear, it was a robust and profitable industry. It demonstrates a timeless truth. When you create a system that rewards finding monsters, people get very, very good at finding monsters, whether they exist or not. The great European witch hunt eventually burned itself out, leaving behind tens of thousands of dead and traumatized communities. The legacy, however, is still with us. The stereotypical image of a witch, the pointy hat, the bubbling cauldron, the broomstick, is a direct descendant of the propaganda and confessions from this era. We've turned a tool of judicial murder into a cute Halloween costume. It's a bit like dressing up as the Spanish Inquisition for a laugh. But the real lesson is more chilling than any ghost story. The witch trials show how a society under extreme stress can be manipulated into hunting a phantom enemy. It reveals our terrifying capacity to demonize the other, the outsider, the nonconformist, the person who is just a little too different. The specific target changes over time, but our talent for mass hysteria seems to be a remarkably durable part of the human experience. We've just gotten better at hiding the pitchforks. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!